All right, I think we are rolling. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Nature and the Night Sky. My name is Lisa. I'm the Regional Program Coordinator for the Nature Conservancy of Canada in Manitoba, and I will be your moderator today. I'd like to start by stating we at the Nature Conservancy of Canada respectfully acknowledge that the work we do across the country is on traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. For a millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I'd like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. So, if you're just getting to know the Nature Conservancy of Canada, we are a national charity and Canada's leading not for profit private land conservation organization. We work to protect our most important natural areas and the species they sustain. Since 1962, NCC and its partners have helped to protect 14 million hectares or 35 million acres, coast to coast to coast. So I am thrilled that we are joined today by Carrie Hamill from the Nature Conservancy of Canada. Carrie is the Director of Conservation right here in Manitoba. Carrie will be sharing the importance of dark skies in nature. We also have Dennis Lyons. Dennis is from the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. He will be discussing dark sky preserves and how you can get involved, as well as tips and tricks on how to view the Perseid meteor shower that is coming up in a couple weeks. Just before we get started, there's a little bit of housekeeping to go over. So we've asked to turn off webcams and mute yourselves to help with feedback, but also help with anyone who's tuning in from a little bit of a poor internet connection, save some bandwidth. Today's event is also being recorded, so we can share a recording after the event if you would like to refer back to it or share with friends and family, as well as provide it to some people who couldn't make it today. You'll also notice when you toggle your mouse, a little taskbar comes up, and there's kind of like a little text message icon. That is the chat function for the event. So please feel free to add any questions, comments, or even reactions throughout the event, and we'll come back to it at the end to answer any questions you have. So that's it for now. I'm going to ask Carrie to hop on the webcam and we'll get started.
All right. Lisa, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Okay. And can you see my slideshow?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, hi, everyone. So my name is Carrie Hamill, and I work here in Winnipeg at the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And I want to talk to you a little bit about nighttime ecology. So I'm an ecologist, and ecology is really the science of thinking about the connections between living things. For example, trying to understand why a certain species lives in a certain place and not others, how species interact with one another, especially when a resource is scarce, how predators and prey interact, and what happens to a natural system, its species, and those interactions when a new pressure, like an invasive species or a development occurs. A lot of ecology is about understanding energy, ultimately how it flows, from the sun through plants to the species that eat the plants, the species that eat the species that eat the plants, etc. All the way through to those decomposer species that recycle nutrients back into the soil. And so I studied ecosystems for most of my kind of formal training and my work career, how boreal forests function after fire, how species in a restored prairie interact with one another, where endangered species live, and the kind of the key pressures on them. And I spent a lot of time developing conservation plans to help maintain these species in these ecosystems. But I did all of my work and thinking and planning in the daytime, and I kind of missed half the world. There's this great book called Ecological Consequences of Artificial Night Lighting, and I can put the information in the chat if anyone's interested in getting it. And it opens up with saying, what if we woke up one morning only to realize that all of the conservation planning of the last 30 years told only half the story? the daytime story. And it's pretty true. It certainly was true for me. I hadn't been thinking about how city lights next to that prairie restoration work I was doing might have been affecting seed germination. I hadn't been thinking about how farmyard lights it might affect the behavior of the two moths, which only fly at night, which are the only pollinators, in the whole world for endangered western prairie fringed orchid down in Stewart Burn, Manitoba, and that I've been trying to conserve. And so, yeah, that book goes on and talks about how our diurnal bias has allowed us to ignore the obvious, that the world is different at night, and that natural patterns of darkness are as important as the light of day in the functioning of ecosystems. And it seems pretty obvious now, but most ecologists work in the daytime. And of course, humans have lit up ecosystems for a long time, making fire to keep predators away, for example. But starting in the 1800s, humans started introducing new energy, new electrical mini suns at night. And we are rapidly, since then, modifying natural patterns of darkness. Street lights, yard lights, lights on communication towers, lit highways that cut through natural areas, light pouring out of windows at night into the night sky. A full third of the people who live on this planet can't see the Milky Way from where they live. So as ecologists, we're only just starting to learn about the results of adding this new energy, this light pollution, what it can do to these ecosystems and species. And this is all pretty new, how artificial lights have been spreading across the globe. And so the science is all pretty new as well. But just some examples of things that researchers have learned, more recently. I think a well-known one is the impact of lit office towers or lit communication towers on migrating birds. Many bird species migrate at night, and it's not just the collisions. Even migration patterns have been modified to avoid bright cities, for example, for some species. Change relationships between predator and prey. If you think of a lot of small mammals, they're active at night so they can avoid predators, but it's brighter out. So some are just simply getting eaten at a higher rate than they used to, and their populations are declining. Other ones, they make a food cache. They collect food and they hide it somewhere dark and away from the eyes of competitors. They're having a harder time finding where to hide them, so they're spending more energy doing that. And as a result, some species are literally weighing less. They have poorer body condition, and so those are just some of the impacts. But there's really very few studies on mammals. For fireflies, there's some studies showing that artificial night lights may change the height that males fly. It changes the length and timing of when they start flashing at night, and presumably this would be modifying mating behaviors that have evolved over thousands of years. And it's not just animals. For plants, different species respond in very different ways, so it's hard to generalize. And of course, most species have not been studied. But there's studies that suggest that light sources, the timing of lighting, the intensity of them can affect seed germination, growth patterns, flowering patterns and timing, and even the date that leaves drop off of certain tree species. For example, sycamore trees in California, on the side of the tree that's closest to a street light, the leaves stay on longer in the autumn. And it seems like it's a small thing, but you can just see it right there. Species like oaks and ash trees, the ones that are in cities, the leaves come out about a week earlier than they do in the countryside. And maybe, or maybe not, that affects the insects that have co-evolved to eat those leaf buds when they come out, which are full of energy. And if those insects are now coming out at the wrong time, as connected to what the trees are doing under these lights, that could be affecting them. And this could all trickle down to a broader ecosystem, but of course, largely hasn't been studied. And there's many more examples from things like sea turtles and salamanders and fish. So this is all depressing, but there's things that we can do. I work at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and we do see conserving nature, intact natural areas, viable examples of ecosystems, and all the species they contain is such an important thing to do. Doing those in blocks that are big enough that we can limit the impact of artificial night lighting is a way that we kind of help maintain those ecosystems the way they've been functioning for thousands of years. Next speaker is going to speak a bit about another tool in the toolbox, which is a dark sky preserve. So it's not just conserving the land, but it's everything around it at night to conserve that whole environment. Of course, not just for nature, but for us. And restoring nature is one of those things that in many parts of the country, some of our preserves and our natural areas are, would do better in the long run, and the species would do better in them if we kind of had some focused restoration of habitat around them or within them. There's lots we can do in our own lives, in our own homes or businesses or communities. The International Dark Sky Association has some great resources on their website, and they have some tips on how to protect the night sky. Some of them are just to use light only if it's needed. Think about the lights you have at your house, in your yard, at your business. What is the function of them? And if it's just for decoration, consider that maybe that's not something that you may want. It will be impacting the environment. Direct light so that it falls only where it's needed. So you see the yard lights that kind of shine out for kilometers around. But if all that's needed is a light to shine down on your stairs because you're worried about falling, then having a light that's directed downward and does that job, you'd still have the light you need, and it would have less impact on the environment. Use light only when it's needed. So if you only need it so that you don't fall on the stairs, maybe you just need one of those sensor lights that comes on when you walk close and goes off when you're inside. And in that case, you've had a dramatic reduction in the amount of light going out into the atmosphere, or into the world, I mean. And then, of course, light only to the brightness needed. If you don't need a blinding light to do the job and use something of a lower intensity, consider doing that. Some retailers, I haven't seen any in Canada yet, but maybe if anyone on the call knows, I'd love to know because I would like to get one. They have dark sky approved light fixtures, and I'm in the market for one for the side of my house where I have one of those lights that shines out far farther than it needs to. And I'd like one that shines just down on where I need it to shine down. And then, don't think about your own yard. You can think about your community. There was a small example from Scotland where a new tennis court was built next to a river. For some reason, they kept the lights on 24 hours a day. And the people that used to fish for trout there at night noticed the trout left. They weren't going to hang out by those lights at night. Probably made them more prone to getting eaten by bigger fish. So simple as them working with the tennis courts. Of course, it saved the tennis courts money to turn off the lights anyway. So, and that International Dark Sky Association has tips on how to approach even your municipal government if you want to think bigger and broader about how to take action across the scale of a municipality. And I guess finally, we need a lot more nighttime ecology research. We need researchers who like working at 3 a.m. If you're in the market to start a research project, or I know a young person thinking of getting into it, there's so much we need to learn. And when we don't really understand how the ecosystem works, then we can't really figure out how to conserve it. So it's a real barrier, and we need more people doing that kind of science. And we can volunteer on our own. Nature Conservancy Canada has a conservation volunteer program. Things like nocturnal owl surveys happen, and events like that. There's a group called FLAP, F-L-A-P, Fatal Light Awareness Program, and they run great programs across the country as well, having to do with reducing the impact of artificial night lighting. And that's the end of my talk, Lisa.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. That's super interesting. Now we're going to move on to Dennis Lyons from the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. I think you just have to hit the unmute button, Dennis.
Can you see my file?
Yep, and we can hear you now. Yep.
Okay. Just a sec here. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. And my name is Dennis Lyons. I'm a volunteer with Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, and in particular the Winnipeg chapter. So just move on here. So why dark skies? Carrie's done a great job to talk and lead into this a little bit, but big thing here is it's a place to preserve nature that relies on the dark. And Carrie did a great job of giving us a lot of the technical details in that. It's also a place to observe the night sky as our ancestors did. It's pretty amazing to be able to go out, and if you think about it for a minute, that everyone who came before us at some time has looked up, and it's a pretty impressive thing. If you look up in the night sky in the city, it's not very exciting. However, if you go down to a place like the Tall Grass Prairie, the Weston Family Interpretive Center, it's just incredible. It literally takes your breath away. It's also a place to recharge your batteries. Now, I don't know about you all, but in my case, one of the reasons I got into astronomy, amateur astronomy, was I really needed something that was totally different. And when I got out and was able to get under the sky and observe, it was just incredible how refreshing it was, even after 6 or 8 hours in the dark, and just how well we feel afterwards. Place to share the experience, whether it's with your family or friends. If you've ever been out in a camping and that, and you sat around and looked up and you've been able to see meteors or satellites going over, or just how the sky changes. And it's incredibly impressive once you start seeing and observing what's going on. And a dark sky preserve allows you to do that. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. So again, Kerry's done a great job on a lot of these things, but some of the challenges, he talked a lot about the nuisance lighting and that's a big thing. But some of the things that we have is people don't understand why the dark sky. They think, oh, those astronomers are just complaining. They want to make everything dark and that. And it comes out of the fear of the dark. And they believe it's dangerous. The dark really isn't dangerous if you understand it. And that's where, when we have a dark sky preserve, part of the program is always there's an outreach program for the public to educate them on astronomy and also being in the dark. So if we're able to take people out into a dark sky preserve, first there's the awe of the spectacle. Then it's also getting them to understand, once their eyes adapt, just how much you actually see in the dark. So it really makes a big difference. And then it also helps people understand, if you want to show them that side, people say, well, criminals, they're running around in the dark all the time. So the problem there is, what we can show people is that criminals don't actually like dark areas. If a building's all lit up, nobody pays any attention to it if somebody walks by it. If a building is dark or has minimum lighting, everybody notices when somebody's there with a flashlight, because quite honestly, some of the studies have shown that criminals use flashlights, and if it's a dark area, it stands out right away, and somebody picks up the phone and calls the police. Why would we go into the dark? I mean, it's dark. It's another reason. People just really don't today, because most people live in a city environment, really go outside the boundaries of the light. Dark sky preserves, if we can show them, and once they've experienced it, we do a lot of work with Okamic Marsh as well, public events. We see a lot of people continually coming back because they've been exposed and now want to see it more. The other challenge we've got is electricity in Manitoba is extremely cheap, so people want to throw up as many lights as they can. LED lighting has added to this problem. Christmas lights usually never used to be a real issue, and it's surprising because LED Christmas lights have become very inexpensive. What it's done now is everybody puts them up, and they put up even more. There's actually more light going into the sky around the holidays now than there ever was. What can we do? Again, Carrie's touched on some of these things. You know, you want to only have the lights on when you need them. Shielded lights to prevent trespass and grouchy neighbors. The new LED lights are, most of the ones that have been put in, especially the ones that have been put in for traffic, are of a spectrum that's the same spectrum as daylight, and it actually prevents people from being able to get to sleep. Want to really promote this, support and promote dark sky sites like Old Man on His Back, which is an NCC site. I believe it was our first dark sky preserve that came along. We also, again, Carrie mentioned it, volunteered to get acknowledged with the, excuse me for a sec, volunteer. In particular, here in Manitoba, the Western Family Tallgrass Prairie Site, the RASC is working towards getting its certification. You can come out, learn to volunteer. The RASC has donated an 8-inch Dobsonian telescope, so people can go out, use the telescope, and become familiar with it. They can also learn about the orchid and the interaction with the moth. They can learn about a dark sky and just really do that. And it really helps if there's more volunteer base to help with those kinds of things. Inform your local mayor, MLA, MP. This isn't to turn around and become political. But in my discussions, when I'm working with the people that make the politicians that deal with legislation and things like that, having them understand that if they can let people know before they build. So for instance, there was quite a trend across Canada to build all these greenhouses with marijuana production. In certain areas, they were very proactive, and the local governments made sure that they had to comply or do the best they could to minimize the lighting in those greenhouses. And they were able to build right from spec for insignificant amount of money, more money, to build the lighthouses so that they prevented as much light escape as possible. Whereas in other places, the lighthouses were built, the lights were on, incredibly bright, and they're on 24 hours. So that's the kind of thing where you can work without saying everybody's got to change over to dark sky friendly lights, to informing them that for anybody that's coming in for a new build, support them and maybe put that into their legislation that they should look at that. And it also gives more people in the county, let's say, that can tell people about different things. So for instance, Carrie asked about lighting. There is lighting available in Canada. If you either Sky News, they advertise in Sky News, which is an astronomical magazine, or you can go to rasc.ca and you want to look up Light Abatement Committee. They don't call it light pollution at the RASC, they call it light abatement. So that was in there, and there are links to dark sky friendly lighting. So the Western Family Tallgrass, just to let you know where we're at on that process, we are partnering with the NCC, and it's a process. It takes time, but it has been started, and we are moving forward. We were kind of hoping that originally our plans was to have it done this year or by now, but COVID has slowed it down, but we haven't stopped. There is some lighting that needs to be adapted, such as the yard light, but we need to just work through that. And again, we're hoping that we'll be able to close it out by the end of the year. One of the commitments, just so you know, from the RASC to the NCC is that we will, on average, do 2 public events out there. The important thing about that is if we can develop this, it also becomes a huge tourism thing. I don't think we'd get as big, but Jasper National Park became a dark sky site, an approved, recognized dark sky site. And they have a major dark sky event once a year, and it brings in thousands and thousands and thousands more dollars to the local community that wasn't happening at that particular time of the year. So there's the hope that with working with Stewart Burn and the other communities in the area, that we may be able to develop this, and certainly in the fall and spring would be awesome areas that we might be able to attract some more commerce to the area. And it also, as a byproduct, promotes the work of the NCC and the Tallgrass Prairie Preserves and why we need to have all these things together. Next thing I'm going to talk briefly about is coming up. Actually, you can see them now. They're just not at their peak. Is the Perseids meteor shower. The best viewing night's going to be August 11th through to the 12th, the morning of the 12th. The Perseids come from comets. All meteor showers are based on some kind of comet. So these ones are from comet 109P Swift-Tuttle. So the difference, you might hear different terminologies. A meteor is still in the sky, and it's about the size of a grain of sand. If you hear the term meteoroid, it's just something that's a little bigger. It could be up to the size of, on average, 3 meters, that kind of thing. When either one of these things, if they manage to stay intact and hit the ground, they're considered a meteorite. And regardless, it could be a meteor or a meteoroid. If they graze the top of the atmosphere and go through it, they tend to create a fireball. They're extremely cool to see, and the Perseids are known for producing some really awesome fireballs. Observing when we're doing meteor showers are really easy to watch. The best way is a lounger, or if you don't have a lounge chair, just a normal lawn chair facing in the right direction. So ideally, you're laying back and you look towards the east. For this particular shower, you look for Cassiopeia, which is the big W, and Perseus, which should be, when you're looking up in the east, should be slightly south of it. And you'll see the radiant. And while the radiant is you're going to see a bunch of specks coming out at different areas, but from that one central area, radiating out away from it. You may see other meteors from other directions. They wouldn't be considered Perseus. They would be called random at that point. You want to bring warm clothes. So even in the summer, if it, let's say you stay out and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you're going to get chilled because you're just sitting there. So that's a good idea to bring along a warm drink, some tea, that sort of thing to help get you through the evening. Beauty is, it's a simple way to enjoy the stars with your family, because while you're looking at the Perseid meteor shower, especially if you manage to sit out for a few hours, you're going to observe the rotation of the stars as they move around with all their different patterns. At this time of year, you'll see the summer Milky Way, which will look quite spectacular. And if you're looking for a place to go, maybe just go out to the NCC site, like the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, as a suggestion. Any questions?
Great. Thank you so much, Carrie and Dennis. Again, if anybody has any questions, you can pop them in the chat, or you can come off of mute and ask them yourselves. Like Dennis said, some of NCC's properties are now open. We just ask that you check our website for any up-to-date information, as well as when you visit, please respect physical distancing. I don't see any questions in the chat right now. Does anyone have any questions before we hop off? Well, if you do later on, feel free to contact us. You can visit both the Nature Conservancy of Canada at natureconservancy.ca, and you can you can also visit the Royal Astronomical Society at rasc.ca. And if you'd like to join any other Nature Conservancy of Canada events, please go to our website. You can find all our events from coast to coast at natureconservancy.ca/events. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Bye.